Welcome back to the Engage podcast. Ryan Argenta here, your host, today and every day. I'm excited to talk about the Non-Qualified Deferred Compensation Plan, along with some open enrollment items with the retirement and insurance team, the R&I guys who need no introductions, Scott Bowles and John Doherty. Gentlemen, thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
Happy to be here.
Today we're talking about the Non-Qualified Deferred Compensation Plan, the NQDC, which we always have these tongue twisters and mouthfuls of acronyms, but these are important things. And then after the break, we're going to talk about open enrollment items and some changes that you need to know as we go into this open enrollment season. So if you don't think you're interested in or you don't qualify for the NQDC, you can fast forward to after the break to talk about open enrollment. Although I do encourage everybody to tune in to hear the NQDC because eventually it may affect you or you may want to take part in it. So anyway, before we get going, I do have a note from our hardworking ALPA attorneys. This episode is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered financial, tax, or legal advice. Everybody's situation is different, so be sure to talk to your own financial advisor, tax professional, and/or attorney before making any decisions about the non-qualified deferred compensation plan or any other retirement strategy. Disclaimer over. So the company, in unison with ALPA, they've come up with this non-qualified deferred compensation plan. And there's numerous things. They've had webinars on it from the Newport group about this, and we'll link all this to the podcast description. The company has set out comms. ALPA, through the R&I committee, have set out comms about this. So I don't want to double book here, but I do have some follow-up questions and some things that we've gotten from the line and from DARTS. But why don't we just kind of zoom out for a second and introduce, why introduce an NQDC plan now? What problem or opportunity is this addressing for Delta pilots?
So the non-qualified deferred compensation plan is a great addition to the arsenal of tax-deferred savings vehicles we have, in addition to things like the 401k, the market-based cash balance plan, and depending on your health plan participation, even the health savings accounts.
Okay, so it's another tool in the box or another spear in the quiver. Is that a good way to sum it up?
Correct. Put it as maybe it's icing on the cake for a rather robust retirement savings portfolio.
Okay. And before we go any further, I guess it's worth noting to be eligible for the NQDC plan, correct me if I'm wrong, you have to be age 55 or older, a captain on any aircraft, which at this rate, you could be age 24, a first officer on a wide body, that's the 76400, 330, or the A350, or a seniority list instructor paid at the wide body FO rate. Does that all check out?
Correct.
Yeah, that's correct.
That does. And once eligible, you will always remain eligible.
Oh, that's a good point.
If you're a 330 FO and decide to go back to 320 FO, you would
always
you'd
qualified.
always be qualified.
Oh.
We have gotten a few questions on why we excluded some people, and generally from the IRS, it has to be a limited group of employees. Generally accepted practice is 10 to 15% of the total population of the company. And those groups that you just mentioned work out roughly to be exactly 10%.
Okay, that's good to know. And so, again, zooming out, and I want to encourage pilots to look at the webinars and read through the comms that have come out from both the company and retirement insurance here. This kind of a two-part process. And Scott, you mentioned in an interview with the company that you've been working on this for the better part of 8 years. And so now it's finally rolled out. And like you say, it's the icing on the cake. And in general, you're saying I can defer income now. There's some tax advantages. There's some tax deferrals. What's the real world advantage here? Does this just kick the tax can down the road, or can this actually make me better off?
It does defer your taxes, or as you said, kick the can down the road. The thought being that as you manage this deferred income, possibly into retirement, that you may be in a lower federal tax bracket. You may possibly be in a different or no state income tax bracket. And also taken in retirement, you'll also be outside of ALPA dues on the money. So there are some definite possible tax benefits to participating.
Okay. And we often hear, high income earners, and we're all fortunate to generally be in that bucket, but high income earners often have tax problems. And so this could be part of a savvy tax strategy. Again, this is informational, educational, but maybe you bring this to your tax advisor, your tax planner, financial planner, but to see if this is a good fit for you. But this could be part of a savvy tax strategy, right?
Correct. And as is always important in the retirement discussions and the deferred income discussions, this plan, perhaps more so than others, would be a great conversation to have with a financial planner about whether you should and how much participate.
Yeah. And so this is all market based. We have our 401k that the company contributes to. We have the market based cash balance plan. And then we have the GVUL, which you can use part of it as an investment. Again, it's all market based. So for those who may already feel retirement planned out or market planned out, what would you say to those people? What makes this option worth paying attention to?
Well, one advantage to the NQDC versus those others that you listed is that you don't have to use this for retirement. You could use this to plan for a large purchase and take it while you're still working. Of course, the tax advantages may or may not work out at that time, but it does not have to be used solely for retirement.
Okay. And so we talked about who's eligible. Scott, tell me, who's the ideal participant?
Well, before I answer that real quick, just to jump on what JD was just saying, one thing to keep in mind, one of the benefits of this plan in the non-qualified status is it does not have limits as the qualified plans like the 401k has. So you would ask, why would someone take advantage of this as opposed to the 401k or the market-based cash balance plan? I think this is more of something in addition to those plans because it gives you an added, almost unlimited bucket that you can fill for future needs and tax deferral purposes.
So you can defer, what is it, up to 75% of your annual compensation?
Yeah, and 100% of your profit sharing.
So that's a pretty large chunk of money that you can defer. And then like John was saying, you can take what they call in-service distributions, but you can get that money out while you're still working for Delta, or you can take it in retirement, depending on maybe that tax strategy, right?
Correct. And again, depending on the conversation you have with your financial planner, and as JD said, you may take this for something that's a large future expense, be it a purchase or school in addition to a 529 or a wedding or what have you. And unlike the qualified plans, which have penalties if taken at younger than 59 and a half, this plan does not have penalties. So it gives you added flexibility. And if the time comes for whatever that future event was, and you decide you do not need it, you have the option of continuing to defer that further downstream.
Okay. Also good to know. So yeah, I guess back to that question of, it's hard to say who the ideal participant is, but are we talking late career captains, or could younger wide body FOs benefit too?
That's a great question. And many are eligible to participate. I would say, from our view, one of the primary targets of who might want to participate would be someone in that latter stage of their career, maybe 55 or 50-year-old, and you might be getting a little further down the road and satisfying things like raising your kids, college may be paid for, you may have finished your mortgage and have additional cash flow, and now you are reaching the high earning years, if not already there, and looking for some ways to sort of tax strategize for what you're going to do as you get to the latter portions of your career or into retirement.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because if you're 55 and you're looking at the exit ramp versus 45 and you're still in wealth generation or you're in growth mode, those are different conversations depending on what your situation is.
Correct.
And so for younger pilots, maybe narrow body captains who are in the earlier stages of their career, should they even touch this? Should they stick with the basics first? Should they look into other options?
Well, that's the great option, is everybody's different. So while we don't envision a lot of younger pilots using it, there's tons of different situations out there.
Talk me through the real financial upsides here. How do you save in taxes? What kind of meaningful growth? Are there compounding benefits? Like, what's the goal here?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, at the time you're contributing to this plan, you may find yourself in a federal tax bracket that could be as high as 37% and a state tax bracket that could be, another 10+%, depending on where you live. So there's a couple of unique opportunities where if you're deferring some of this income into the future, you may be in a significantly lower federal tax bracket, There's a couple of nuances with the state tax brackets that we can get into a little bit later, but you may be in a more efficient state income tax situation, either a lower tax or even a no income tax state. And then if the contributions are taken in retirement, you'll also be escaping ALPA dues on that contribution amount.
Okay. Also good to know, part of your strategy there. John, what other angles can we approach the NQDC from, maybe aside from the tax benefit? We've really hammered the tax savings and the tax deferrals, but I'm trying to wrap my mind around, is there a way that you could defer compensation that you may not need now? Let's say you don't need $100,000 a year right now at the highest tax bracket in your highest earning years of your life. Can you defer that into retirement where you may or should have a lower tax bracket and essentially pay yourself in retirement?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of ways to do that. Probably one of the most famous NQDCs out there is Bobby Bonilla. I'm sure you've heard of Bobby Bonilla Day. Every summer he gets about $1.2 million from the Mets, and he hasn't played since 2000.
Okay, hang on, because I love this. All right, so Bobby Bonilla, yeah, the Mets baseball player, right?
Yep.
He retired in like 1999, or last year he played was 1999.
I think for the Mets, yeah. Last year he played for the Mets. He deferred, I think, roughly about $6 million, and since 2011 all the way to 2035, he gets about $1.2 million every summer. So
okay, yeah. So like July, it's usually July 4th weekend. They bring out Bobby Bonilla. They have Bobby Bonilla Day.
Yep.
And they present him this like $1.2 million check. I never knew that was just him receiving his deferred compensation check.
Yeah. I mean, he is a general creditor to the Mets. I mean, if the Mets were to go bankrupt, that could put his payment at risk, but how likely is that? I don't know.
Okay, so you kind of use that example story of his financial literacy, the power of deferred payments and compound interest. I guess you could say delayed gratification, right?
Sure.
But as a ball player, that was a smart move.
Yeah, I think anybody looking back now would take that every day.
Well, so now we as pilots may have the same opportunity. You don't have to look back and say, oh, I wish I had that. We're saying you can have this, and here's an opportunity.
Yeah.
That's just something I didn't wrap my mind around in the initial phase of this, but that could be a potential way to essentially pay yourself in retirement, or at least the first 5, 10 plus years in retirement, gain that compound interest, have a lower tax rate, and potentially not have to tap in as heavily into your 401k.
Or so you could delay Social Security possibly and get a bigger payment that way too.
Okay.
It's almost like you're building your own annuity without the fees.
Oh, got it. Okay. That's a great additive. Perfect. Okay. Well, that's another angle to look at for the NQDC. So appreciate that. Bobby Bonilla, what a guy.
And you asked about investments on that. So the investment opportunities that exist within the deferred comp plan essentially mirror the 401k fund lineup, with one exception, and that is there is no brokerage link option within the deferred comp plan.
So to me, that sounds like there's some life cycle funds, there's some various ETFs, maybe index ETFs or index funds there. What else? What am I missing?
There's a money market, a bond fund, an S&P, large cap, mid cap, international, et cetera.
But rather conservative in general, right?
That is always a good option to be conservative.
Yeah. Okay. Does this affect or interact with required minimum distributions in the future, your RMDs from your qualified plans, or this is completely separate?
While there are no RMDs on this plan, it is taxed when you take it out. So it could increase your taxes while you're actually having to take RMDs from those other qualified plans.
One thing just to make sure we come back to, and I mentioned it in just an earlier comment about some subtle nuances on the state tax piece. We do want to come back and focus on that as a foot stomper for people that might be thinking, hey, I live in California and I'm paying 13+%, but I'm going to move to Texas or Florida or, Nevada or wherever. There is a requirement that if you take your retirement distribution in less than a 10-year payout, you may owe taxes on the state in which the money was earned. Now, that's the legal statement. How that state would know that you're taking it, I'm not sure. But nevertheless, we want to make sure we make that statement so people are aware of that.
No, that's a good point, because that could be part of a strategy. We're trying to keep this high-ish level overview with some nuanced questions, but when you're listening to this, we absolutely encourage you not only talk to your planners and your advisors, but really dig into the material. Again, we're going to link this to the podcast description. The Newport Group has put out really good webinars, really good information sources there. You can always send a dart or check in with the R&I committee and ask particular questions about whether it's enrollment or the technical side of that. But please do look at the literature, listen to the webinars, and make sure you get your questions answered. So again, this is high level-ish just to get your attention, to give you some bridge information. But that's a good point on the state tax level. And since we're on a bit of a technical side, I do want to ask, so if you defer, let's say you're just killing it and you're in your last couple of years and you say, I'm going to defer 75% of my compensation. Does this affect your compensation
Yes.
for the 401k contribution and your own personal, I mean, how does it affect your contributions there, profit sharing, all that stuff?
Great question. You could actually find yourself in a situation where you have zero income and you would be required to stroke a check to the company to pay for things like your healthcare benefits, et cetera, because this money will come out before your 401k withholdings.
Yes. And then the answer
So
to tag on the profit sharing question and disability and what have you, all of those calculations, it's if you made $100,000 and deferred 75%, all of those calculations would be off the $100,000.
Okay, but the
Correct.
company's contribution would be based off of what you earned, not what
Yeah.
you.
The company's 401k contribution, your profit sharing, your disability pay would all be off of your full pay.
Okay. So let's go down that path because I like it. So you earn $100,000 in flight pay, let's say in 2026, and you elect to defer 75% into the NQDC. So 75,000 for my pea brain, pilot math, but 75,000 would be deferred. Your remaining eligible earnings for your personal 401k contributions would be 25,000, right?
Right.
If you elect to contribute 10% pre-tax to your 401k on the personal side, then that will result in $2,500 contribution.
Well done. Yes.
Okay, thank you. But the company's contribution to your 401k would be based on the 18% of 100,000. So their contribution would be 18,000.
Correct.
Whew.
And if you
And then
disabled,
if you ended up, yeah,
that would still be 100,000 on the calculation, or
Okay.
half of 100,000. And same for your profit sharing, it would be 100,000.
Got it. Okay. In the webinars, people ask some specific scenarios, specific questions. And so we don't necessarily have to go down that path, but there are some good options, some good examples of, okay, maybe you are 45 years old and maybe your spouse is a high income earner as well, and you want to reduce your tax bill while also saving, like you mentioned, as a college savings, or maybe you want to buy that killer house, in 10 years or whatever. And so there are a lot of examples of how and why you would use that. I think people are maybe having trouble wrapping their minds around, well, how would I employ this?
Yeah. So to start off, there's two different kinds of accounts. There's the retirement/termination account and the in-service accounts. There can be up to 5 in-service accounts. The first account, that money in that retirement/termination account is tied up until you retire/terminate, plus all the years of distribution, which can be up to 10 years. So if you're a 25-year-old captain and you put money into that retirement/termination account and take 10 years of distribution, you have tied yourself for 50 plus years to the health of Delta Airlines. And, your life's going to change over that time too. So you have tied up your money, even if your personal life has changed and you want that money sooner. So there are some more effective ways to use the in-service accounts and just keep pushing them out, a strategy known as laddering.
Tell me more about laddering.
great question. And we do have a communication that'll be published almost the same time this podcast goes live that discusses a couple of examples in laddering. But in a nutshell, the basics of laddering would be, let's say, for example, you decide to defer 5% of your income starting in January of 2026. For example, you could defer that money for, say, 3 years. So you would defer 5%, and then next year you could revisit. And if you were happy with the health of the airline and your current situation, you could again choose to defer 5% for another 3 years. And you would do this for 3 years. In the fourth year, you would find that first year's 5% is now going to come back to you, and you have a choice. Are you going to take the money, or would you choose to redefer it? If you were to redefer it, this is now that first step in the ladder. You're deferring 5%, and now you're redeferring 5%. So in effect, starting in year 4, your total deferral is 10%. And again, you could continue this in year 4, in year 5, and year 6. And then the next rung in the ladder comes along. In year 7, you would have 5% and 5% coming back to you, and you would effectively be deferring 15% if you chose to continue. So you could continue stepping up the ladder. Your original investment is the only amount that you've actually seen out of pocket, but your total contribution rate continues to step or ladder up.
Okay. I like that.
It gets confusing very quickly. So if that made sense.
It does. And again, you can get a better visual in the written com that's going to come out.
And the good thing about laddering, though, is along the way, you can decide to take your money.
Right.
And if you redefer, that is something that needs to be said. If you redefer, it's 5 years IRS minimum is the minimum redeferral period. So you got to assess your health and Delta Airlines health, a year before you take the money.
Okay. And, I'm smelling what you're stepping in, because the two things that the recurring theme here is you said the health of Delta and deferred, right? So you're deferring your compensation, but the money technically sits in the company's pocket, right? Which may feel a little weird. And so should pilots be comfortable with that?
Again, that's a great question to have with your financial planner. And I know I keep going back to that, but in some of the webinars that you have access to watch, you'll hear the consultants and the Newport group discuss some of the non-qualified status and the fact that this money it actually sits in something known as a rabbi trust, but we don't need to get into too many details on that.
It's a cool story.
Protects the money from, right. It protects the money from a change of control within the corporation. So it is not to be used for general day-to-day expenses. However, it is important to know, and I would call that a foot stomper, that if something bad were to happen to Delta, that money would be accessible to creditors in the event of a bankruptcy.
Yeah. And so in a bankruptcy world, we've all seen that before. Those deferred dollars could be compromised. There is a risk.
For sure.
Correct.
And since we're on this topic, I don't want to take this negative, but the company and ALPA have worked on this in tandem, like you said, for about 8 years. What's in it for Delta? Why would they offer a plan where they're holding the deferred assets?
Well, part of it is we've asked for it, and it is not an expensive benefit for Delta to give to their pilots. And so it allows us to protect some of the assets that they are already sharing with us in a more tax efficient way if you choose to participate. So I think at the end of the day, that was really the attraction for Delta. It was a negotiated item that is beneficial to the pilots and not harmful to the company.
Okay. And so again, without getting too much into the weeds, but I do want to talk about the risks and some disadvantages. Like John was saying, if you redefer, you're locked in for 5 years, IRS rules. In the ladder approach that you were talking about, let's say you do a 3-year ladder, the rungs on the ladder are 3 years apart. If you say smelled something, or, there were talks of some troubled times or some difficult times, could you access that money rather quickly and just get it out? Or are you still tied to those timelines?
You are
tied to those timelines. Yes.
Yeah, you are tied to the timelines. And
so that's a bit of a buyer beware.
Especially with the retirement/termination account. So if you're a long ways away, it might be better to use in-service accounts. And then a key feature to the all in-service accounts not in payment when you retire roll into your retirement/termination account. So you could have two different total, you could set your in-service accounts to pay out as a lump sum, but that retirement account to pay out over 5 or 10 years. And as soon as you retire, now you've just made an installment plan.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay. And some of the highlights, my notes from the webinars, but there's no rollover. There's no loan. You can't take a loan against your account. So no rollover, no loans. Technically, the company still owns the money. So there's some risk, and there's a bit of trust involved in that.
Another negative is that you are setting a date, and generally you can't get that money sooner. You can get it later, but you can't get it sooner.
When you choose to defer, you also choose the time and methodology as to how you will receive the money. And if you make changes to that, and this is a definite foot stomper, if you make any changes to that, that will push out that distribution date an additional 5 years. So in JD's example, if you were the 25-year-old that put money into a retirement bucket 40 years in the future, and you were to say choose a 10-year deferral, which makes it 50 years in the future, and at some point you changed your mind in how you were going to receive those retirement assets, that would further delay that 10-year receipt of that money by 5 years. So now you're 55 years in the future as a 25-year-old. So JD's point about maybe when you're on the younger side, considering in-service accounts might be a wiser strategy. But again, a great conversation to have with who.
Yeah.
There you go. Okay. And webinars talk about how you can rebalance your account, and they left it kind of vague. I don't know if you want to go down that path, but
Yeah, if you change the investments in your account, you're not locking yourself into 5 years. You can change the investments as you see fit. In any of the accounts, you can have them all the same. You can have them different based on what your goals are. If you're taking one for a close-in need, you may be more conservative than something that you're planning for in 10 years from now or 15 years from now.
okay, gotcha. And so at the end of all this, when the payout hits, Uncle Sam's waiting at the other end.
Yeah.
And you've got to understand that.
Yeah. The tax man always cometh.
Right. Could taking those distributions really, I guess at any point, I guess it could kind of crush your tax bracket, or could it affect like Medicare premiums or other issues down the road?
Great question. It could. It may depend on what your total receipt of money is in that given year. It's likely that you would find yourself in a lower federal tax bracket, but it's not guaranteed. So again, that's a good conversation to have with a planner.
Okay. Yeah. I know we keep going down that path, but it's true. I mean, these are individual circumstances are so unique that to talk about this in this episode, and we can do more for sure, especially based on feedback and darts. But, yeah, it's absolutely necessary that for your own fit, because this really is the measure twice, cut once kind of decision, and don't go it alone. Or in my case, I measure 12 times and cut 6, but
great point.
I was just going to say there are a lot of pros to this plan. There are also a decent amount of cons.
Yeah. So give me about some of the risks and disadvantages. What am I missing?
The one other thing I would add as a con is don't be the guy that takes 75% out and thinks he can change it 3 weeks in. It's going to be what you select for the year is for the year, unless you qualify for one of those limited hardship draws.
Yeah.
Correct.
And maybe I'll give Scott another foot stomper, but you have to make these elections during the open enrollment window, which is why we're talking about this now. Can you say out loud when the open enrollment window, the dates?
It's from the 4th until then November 19th.
Okay, November 4th to November 19th. That's a pretty short window, frankly, to be making these kinds of decisions. And if you don't do it, if you don't participate this year, you can always participate next year,
Assuming you're eligible.
Assuming you're eligible. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
And that's one of the great pros for this plan is that you will make an annual election. So if it's too soon or you're not sure this year and you want to have further conversations with either a planner or with the R&I team, we're happy to have those conversations. And you would, if again, as JD said, if you're eligible, then you would have the opportunity to enroll next year.
Okay. Yeah. And that's a great point. So if you feel rushed to make a decision, maybe hold on, spend the next year getting your ducks in a row, getting the advice, talking to R&I, talking to your tax planners and financial advisors, and then coming up with a plan so that when the window opens next year, next open enrollment, you can set it up and click submit.
Correct.
What else you guys got?
I would just follow on to some of the earlier comments about, you're going to make an annual election to consider participating in the deferred comp plan. And as JD was saying, if we had one of those, unfortunately, they've happened all too often in many of our careers, the black swan event that makes you wonder about how things are going to look in the future, you would likely choose to not continue to elect contributions into this plan for the following year, even though the year that you elected, let's say that you elected for 2026, in the middle of 26, something bad happens, you would be locked in for 26, but you would likely choose to not participate and contribute in 2027 and going forward. So you were already in the beginnings of trying to recover those dollars that you invested according to whatever allocation and distribution plan that you chose when you selected the fund.
Yeah, they're annual elections. So make the election as you see fit at the time, and they do not carry over. They're not evergreen. Like our healthcare options, if you don't select something and you were on the silver one year, you're on the silver next year. This, if you don't select something, you have no contributions the following year.
Okay, so there is a fail-safe, if you will, but okay. Barring anything else, I mean, this is a pretty complex topic, but thanks for breaking it down and thanks for talking to us in this format, in this setting. And again, those webinars are great. We're going to link all that stuff to the podcast description. You can look forward to more information coming out from R&I and from the union's communications committee. But we'll leave it at that for now. The NQDC, it isn't a one-size-fits-all deal. For some pilots, it can be a powerful tool for tax and income planning. For others, it may not make sense at all. So the key is understanding how it fits in your personal timeline, your own risk tolerance, and your long-term goals.
Well said.
Thanks. All right, we're going to take a break here. When we come back, Scott and John from R&I are talking open enrollment, what's new, what's changed, and how you can make solid decisions in the open enrollment window. Stay tuned.
Get instant union updates delivered straight to your device, from contract news to scheduling alerts. Search Delta MEC updates on Telegram to join. Available on iOS, Android, iPad, Mac, and PC. You can now receive real-time updates via our Telegram channel. Thick negotiation news, bidding reminders, and operational updates, all sent straight to your device. It supplements email and the website, and it's offline accessible. Find the link in this week's email or scan the QR code in the MEC News post.
Welcome back here again with Scott Bowles and John Doherty. Switching gears now, we talked about the NQDC, the Non-Qualified Deferred Compensation Plan, which is electable during open enrollment. Maybe John can take the lead here. As we go into open enrollment, tell me what's new. What do pilots need to know as we make these choices going forward? We're now talking healthcare, the GVUL, the Group Variable Universal Life. Again, tongue twisters and long names. That's the name of the game here, but walk me through what's new. What do pilots need to know for their open enrollment selections?
So what's new in 2026? The big one comes from the Delta Pilot High Deductible Healthcare Plan and the Delta Pilot Medical Plan. The two contractual plans in 2026 will have the Prudent RX program. Previously, we've rejected it as a union. It's a high-level overview. It's a way for specialty meds to cost less. But then you go from an open network provider to a closed network provider. This one, if you're in the network and your specialty meds covered, it's a $0 copay. So ultimately it saves money. And because it lowers cost, it also saves money for everybody on the plan, including people not on specialty. It's because it overall lowers cost. We were on the fence for the last 2 years. The copay plan has had it for 2 years. The other HSAs, the non-contractual HSAs, have had it for 1 year. We solicited pilots this year for some feedback, and we got one negative response. Everything else has been positive. So I think we're finally at a point where we're comfortable using it in the two plans. So because now Prudent RX is in both Gold HSA and the Delta Pilot High Deductible Plan, the plans are again mirroring each other. Last year, there was a $1 split on some of the, I think it was in the family plan, the Delta Pilot High Deductible Healthcare Plan cost $1 more last year. So now they're essentially the same. So every Delta Pilot that's currently on the Gold should now be on the Delta Pilot High Deductible Healthcare Plan.
Yeah, can we foot stomp that? I mean, I know Scott loves the foot stompers anyway, but if you are on the Gold plan, it mirrors the negotiated pilot only, right? So any employee can sign up for the Delta Gold plan.
That's correct.
But only Delta pilots can sign up for the
Delta Pilot High Deductible Healthcare Plan, the DPHA.
As the name implies.
So,
because they're mirrored, but contractually, the Delta Pilot High Deductible plan is contractually
There's some circuit breakers in that plan. Currently, the company is not on any of those circuit breakers, but you think back to other things, they just can't willy-nilly change things. The perfect example was during COVID. For a while, they were going to charge everybody that was unvaccinated a surcharge. Well, the DPMP was excluded from that. The DPHDHP did not exist at that time. So had we had both plans, both of those would have been exempted from that requirement because we wouldn't have agreed to change, and we didn't.
Okay. And to be clear, the Delta Pilot high deductible healthcare plan, which mirrors the Gold, they both have an HSA component.
Yes.
Okay.
They both
Correct.
do. They both get Delta Health rewards, the same amount. The Delta Pilot high deductible plan has to have the minimum IRS deductible by law. By the way, those are going up this year. That's something else that's changed. But
Imagine that.
yeah, so they mirror each other right now. So the premiums are exactly the same, assuming everything else in the plan is exactly the same, which it is this year.
Okay. So bottom line for pilots, if you are considering the Gold plan, you should probably consider the Delta Pilot's high deductible health plan instead.
Correct.
Take a closer look.
And that is our most popular plan, although over the years, especially a couple years back when Delta got rid of the bronze plan and made the silver basically the better bronze, there has been a movement for healthier individuals to move towards that silver plan because the premiums are so much less.
Right. Okay. Good to know. What else you got?
Yeah, speaking of premiums, it's healthcare, and unfortunately, this day and age, there never seems to be a decrease. So, other than a contractually negotiated decrease that we saw a couple years ago, so they've all gone up a little bit year over year. It is an expensive proposition to cover all the employees at Delta. So, yeah, it's not great, but I think that's everybody out there is seeing increased premiums.
Okay.
Well, I would just take this opportunity to tell people that while you're looking at your benefits for 2026, if you are a participant in the high deductible healthcare plans, the HSA eligible plans, that you make sure that you have accomplished your couple required items for your Delta Health rewards, because the clock is ticking towards the end of the year and you don't want to miss out on those funds.
Yeah, so what you do in 2025 is what you receive in 2026. So those items you check off in 2025, those are your Delta Health rewards dollars for 2026.
And it's become much more simple than it was years ago, where now, especially as a line pilot, your medical that you carry qualifies for your well check. So really the only extra duty you have to accomplish is the ShareCare app. You go through and do the real age test, which is not that lengthy. And in doing so, you'll be eligible for the full health rewards for yourself. And then, of course, if you have a spouse, and kids are automatic, but the spouse does have to do the real age test for themselves, as well as receive a well check during the year.
Or some of the cancer screenings is the third one that
True.
automatically qualifies.
Okay. Switch me up to the GVUL, the Group Variable Universal Life. And this is a bit of a different tangent, but it's applicable because there is an open enrollment election that you can make. And I want to draw your attention. We talked about this so many times, but episode 38 is on the GVUL itself, what pilots need to know about the new Group Variable Universal Plan. And then also episode 59 talks about a lot of things, including the GVUL, market-based plan, some insurance products. So episode 38, 59. But guys, tell me about the GVUL and why pilots should or could switch from the term life to the GVUL.
Well, we've had this discussion before on those two episodes you mentioned, and we wish we could say that all Delta pilots were currently on the GVUL plan. In the first year that this plan was offered, had we all been on it, collectively, we would have saved something around just in excess of $30 million in imputed income taxes. So quick overview, the GVUL is the same death benefit life insurance coverage as the term policy. It is a much less expensive policy when it comes to the imputed income. So we would encourage everyone to think about it. And there is a pop-up this year. If you are not a participant in the GVUL, you're going to get a pop-up reminder as you go through open enrollment that will ask you to verify or think about participating in the GVUL.
It is a two-step process to join the GVUL. First is the open enrollment site on Delta's side. And the second is you'll get an email from MetLife, I believe in January, starting their open enrollment. So it is a two-step process.
Okay. And, you talk imputed income, and often that's lost on us because it's a line item on your pay statement. It's a line item on your W-2. And so high level overview of imputed income, but basically, as far as the IRS is concerned, you're given a benefit that is worth a certain value of dollars, and then your tax rate applies to that particular amount.
Yeah. So if you have an imputed income of $1,000, you didn't pay $1,000 of tax, whatever your tax rate is, whether it's 25%, if we go with that, you would effectively be paying $250 of real money on that $1,000 benefit.
Okay, that makes sense. And so not the only difference, but a difference of this imputed income is for the same life insurance policy, you're paying less in imputed income, which means less in hard dollar tax for the GVUL.
Yeah, I insert your tax rate to say the age 60 and plus pilots. It's something like about a $5,500 a year difference between the two plans. So insert your tax rate times 5,500, and most of those guys are high incomes, probably costing them at least $1,500 to $2,000 out of pocket, not being on the more tax advantage plan.
We don't have to get in the weeds here, but I'd like you to mention that there's an investment option to this GVUL, and how could pilots participate in that? What would it mean? What are the benefits?
Sure. Well, I think what JD was saying was chronologically gifted pilots. The 60 plus crowd does indeed pay a much higher imputed income. And I just want to revisit that imputed income for a moment, because we've had some really unfortunate situations where pilots saw the imputed income line item on the paycheck that you mentioned, and they saw that as an actual premium. And as a result, they went out and obtained their own insurance on the outside. In doing so, they then canceled their Delta insurance. And then something bad happened that might have been an exclusion on the new policy they took out that would have been covered by the Delta policy. And in fact, their families were then not given a death benefit. Just really an unfortunate situation. So again, the line item of the imputed income on your paycheck is not the premium.
And both policies have the same exclusion, which there are none.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well,
Very good.
there's that one.
Well,
Death at the hands of your beneficiary is excluded. So as our benefit specialists like to say, choose wisely.
but in reality, it goes to the second beneficiary. But it is a good R&I joke.
John, why don't you tell us about the investment option of the GVUL and why pilots may want to participate in it?
Well, on the investment side, very few pilots do participate because there is a 2.25 load on the front hand side. So you take 2.25 off of your initials. So if you contributed $100, it's down to $97.75. But there is a small tax play. Well, there's multiple things you could do with the investment side, but there is a small tax play that you could play over the years. If you're, say, 20 years out, if you contributed, I believe the math was about $250 a month and had a reasonable rate of return, your goal is the money that you put in, the growth on your money would equal that or approximate that of what Delta paid on your behalf of the insurance over those years. So if Delta, and our rates are available on the R&I committee website, but if Delta paid, for example, $40,000 over the course of your career in insurance premiums, you would want to try to make your growth equal to $40,000. And then at retirement, you could take all of that money plus your money out all tax-free, because your money's always going to come out tax-free, but it is a small tax play.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is through the GVUL, you can create a cash value into the plan, into the policy, and there are investment options that you can put that money into. And so after you consult your tax planner, of course, and again, not financial advice, but you could potentially, the deal is the IRS says whatever premiums you pay over the course of your career, you can remove that same value of cash, that cash value tax-free.
Yeah, your money always comes out tax-free.
Okay, so if Delta pays $40,000 over the next 20 years in someone's career, and you contribute money, let's say $250 a month, and then it grows conservatively at say 6 to 8%, and in 20 years you have a cash value of $40,000.
Yeah, if you contributed 100,000 and you hit it out of the park and you had 140, your 100 would come out, your 40 that you grew it by equals Delta's premiums. Let's just say in that example, you could take the whole 140 out tax-free.
And if it were 150, then you'd pay tax on the $10,000 difference.
And the $10,000 difference would be at income tax rates versus capital gains. So you don't want to overfund potentially.
Okay, because this is essentially a whole life.
And it is your policy when you retire.
Okay.
So there are other things that you can do with the policy when you retire.
And you can take a policy loan. You can borrow against your cash value.
Yes.
That's correct.
And the loans aren't taxable as long as the policy remains in force.
But I mean, you could just take the money out at some point too, still tax-free versus a loan.
True, but if you take it out as a loan, your money still stays in the market. You're actually taking a loan from MetLife. True.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
We're in like varsity level here.
I know.
Okay. So long story short, if you want a cool little tax play here, put some money into the GVUL, $250 a month. If you're a little older, maybe $500 a month. You can match Delta's premiums by the time you retire. You can remove all that money up to what they paid in premium plus your own money tax-free, completely tax-free. And maybe that's like a nice boat payment in retirement or.
Yeah, could be.
Right.
A great conversation to have with your friendly financial planner.
Yes.
Totally agree. Okay. Coming back to open enrollment, anything else pilots need to know about open enrollment? The dates are November 4th to November 19th. Make your elections during that period. We've talked to GVUL. You can sign up for that. You'll get a pop-up if you're not enrolled. The non-qualified deferred compensation plan is open to enroll in that.
Just to add on, Delta did do a life insurance RFP this year. So the optional life insurance, which is the policy that can be up to $1.5 million, the cost has gone down on that one.
Okay.
So that's paid for by the pilot. That's in addition to the basic, the GVUL.
Okay. Scott, anything to add on open enrollment or anything at all?
I would make one shameless plug for a set of policies that have been pretty popular around the ALPA volunteers, and that is a product offered through ALPA National. This is not part of Delta's open enrollment, but it has proven popular, and that is known as the accident and critical illness coverage. And if you have questions about it, you're welcome to give R&I a call or try ALPA National, and we're happy to talk to you about the details in that, but something worth considering.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great plug, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, I subscribe to that policy myself and enjoy the benefits of it. And in a word, it essentially pays for itself.
Correct. I would say all of the R&I guys take advantage of it, and we've had numerous claims as a result, and it really gives you some downside protection from some of the high deductible plans, as well as any other level of coverage. If you happen to be accident prone or have kids, it will definitely pay for itself.
Fantastic. Well, let's wrap there. This has been super informative. Big thanks to our guests from Retirement Insurance, Scott Bowles and John Doherty. Thank you both for being here. And thanks for everything you do for us. Again, do your homework, talk with your financial advisor, your tax professional, or attorney before making any decisions. But if you have any questions, reach out to the ALPA Retirement and Insurance Committee via DART for more information, details, or clarification. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay informed, and we'll see you next time.
You're listening to Engage, the podcast for Delta pilots. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or your favorite podcast platform, and receive notifications when a new episode is available.